Holy Redemption Church in South Greensboro had never really caught the eye for its architecture. The small brick building with cracked steps and a faded sign stood wedged between a laundromat and an abandoned store. But on this June day, the church seemed to have a new lease on life. A few shabby cars lined the street, and a homemade banner hung on the door. Damari and Imani wed today. Inside the church, the pews were filled with about 24 guests. An elderly priest with a good-natured smile stood at the altar, decorated with inexpensive white flowers and candles from the dollar store. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting spots of color on the worn carpet. Damari Chikwendu was shuffling from foot to foot at the altar. His dark suit was clearly off the shoulder, but it fit his tall figure well. At 29, Damari looked older, years of hard living having left marks on his face in the form of wrinkles around his eyes and permanently furrowed brows. But today, his eyes shone with hope as he waited for his bride. "Don't be so nervous, son," the priest whispered, leaning toward him. "Everything will be all right." Damari nodded, trying to calm himself. His gaze slid over the guests and settled on Father Kamdem Chikwendu, sitting in the second row, unaccustomed to neatness in an old-fashioned suit. His graying hair was neatly combed back, and his usually red face looked relatively fresh today. Damari caught his gaze, and his father nodded slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture of approval that made Damari's heart clench with unexpected tenderness. Music from the old record player heralded the arrival of the bride, and all heads turned to the door. Imani Okafor entered under the arm of her uncle, the only relative who had agreed to attend the wedding. In a simple white dress bought at a thrift store, with a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands, she looked like a vision. Her dark skin glowed, and her eyes were full of determination, and something else Damari couldn't quite pinpoint. "Beautiful," whispered one of the guests. Imani walked slowly down the aisle, smiling at Damari. In her mid-20s, she retained a youthful grace despite her years as a waitress at Melvin's Diner. Her tall hair was adorned with small white flowers, and around her neck hung a simple silver pendant, a gift from her mother, who had not lived to see this day. In the front row sat Kiana Nyong, Imani's best friend, wearing a bright yellow dress that stood out among the modest outfits of the other guests. Her gaze was fixed on the bride, but her expression remained impenetrable. The ceremony was short and touching. The priest spoke of love and fidelity, of the difficulties the young couple would have to overcome, of the hope for a better future. Damari and Imani exchanged vows and exchanged rings, simple gold bands with the wedding date engraved on the inside. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest said. "You may kiss the bride." Damari leaned toward Imani, and their lips joined in a kiss, to the applause of the guests. In that moment, he felt something heavy that had been weighing on his soul for the past weeks recede. Everything would be all right. They would start a new life. After the ceremony, a small celebration was held at the community center nearby. The room was decorated with colorful ribbons and balloons, and tables were set with home-cooked meals prepared by friends and neighbors. Music played from speakers brought by Damari's buddy. To the happy couple, Imani's uncle, a tall man with graying temples, raised his glass. "May your journey be long and joyful." The guests supported the toast, but the atmosphere remained slightly tense. Too many different people were gathered in one room. Damari's former cellmates, Imani's neighbors, a few colleagues from work, relatives on both sides who barely knew each other. Kamdem stood in the corner with a glass of punch, which Damari suspected he had already managed to improve with the contents of a flask from his inside pocket. His gaze followed his son and daughter-in-law with a kind of incomprehensible longing. "Your father doesn't look very happy," Imani said, following her husband's gaze. "He just doesn't know how to be happy for others," Damari replied, shrugging his shoulders. "Don't mind him." Kiana approached the newlyweds, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Congratulations to both of you. she said, hugging her friend. "Imani, you are the most beautiful bride." "Thank you for being there for me," Imani replied, hugging her friend tightly. "Without you, I wouldn't have been able to handle all the preparations." Damari noticed them exchange a strange look, but wrote it off to the emotion of the moment. Female friendship had always seemed a mystery to him. In another corner of the hall, a group of men, friends of Damari's from the car wash where he worked, were laughing loudly at some joke. One of them, Levan, caught Damari's eye and raised his glass in a welcoming gesture. "Hey, lucky guy," he shouted. "Who would have thought you'd be the first of us to settle down?" Damari smiled and headed towards them, leaving Imani with her friend. While he was chatting with his buddies, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Kiana and Imani talking seriously about something in the corner. Imani looked flustered, while Kiana shook her head. The celebration went on for hours. People ate, drank, danced, and congratulated the newlyweds. But beneath the surface of the merriment, tension could be felt, especially when Camdemus, already visibly inebriated, tried to make a toast. "I want to say," he began, rising from his chair and swaying. "I want to say that my son—" He hesitated, searching for words. "My son deserves happiness. I hope he finds it." There was doubt in his words, and Damari felt the color of shame flood his face. He walked quickly over to his father and gently lowered him back into his chair. "Thank you, Dad," he said quietly. "Maybe you should get some rest." Toward evening, the guests began to disperse. Damari and Imani had planned to spend the weekend in a small house outside the city, which they had managed to rent cheaply from an acquaintance of Levan's. Not the most luxurious wedding trip, but all they could afford. "Are you ready?" Damari asked, helping Imani gather the gifts. "Yes," she replied, and a strange note flashed in her voice. "Let's get out of here." They said goodbye to the remaining guests and got into Damari's old Honda. Kiana gave her friend a particularly long hug goodbye, whispering something in her ear that made Imani nod with a serious expression. The drive to the lodge took about half an hour. They drove mostly in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. Damari glanced occasionally at his wife's profile, lit by the fading sun, and felt a strange mixture of happiness and anxiety. The house was exactly as Levan had described, a small wooden cottage on the edge of the forest. One bedroom, a kitchen living room, a tiny bathroom. Simple furniture, but clean and cozy. On the table was a bottle of champagne with a note from Levan. "To start the honeymoon. Don't thank me." Home sweet home. Damari smiled, bringing their things in. Imani slowly walked around the cabin, exploring every corner. Her face was pensive, almost detached. "What are you thinking about?" Damari asked, hugging her from behind. I can't believe we actually did it," she replied, turning to him. "We're married, and it's forever," he said, kissing her. They opened the champagne and drank to their new life. Damari talked about his plans, how they would save money, maybe someday buy their own house, have children. Imani listened with a half smile, nodding occasionally. "I have something for you," Damari said, pulling a small box out of his pocket. "It's not very expensive, but—" In the box was a dainty bracelet with a small star-shaped pendant. "It's beautiful," Imani whispered, letting him clasp the bracelet on her wrist. Time passed, and they were about to go to bed when there was a loud knock on the door. Who could it be? Damari frowned, heading for the door. Standing on the threshold, swaying, was Camdemus. His eyes were red, his tie was off to the side, and he smelled strongly of alcohol. Dad, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk, son," Camdemus muttered, pushing his way into the house. Alone. Imani watched them tensely from the bedroom door. "It's all right," Damari told her. "I'll take care of it. Why don't you take a shower in the meantime?" As Imani disappeared into the bathroom, Damari turned to his father. "You're drunk," he stated, "and you're ruining my wedding day." I didn't mean to. Camdemus sank heavily onto the couch. I just have to tell you something. Can it wait until tomorrow? No. Camden shook his head. It's about your fiancée, wife. I heard her talking to a friend. They're up to something, son. What are you talking about? Damari asked irritably. Money. They were talking about money. Your money. Camden tried to focus his eyes on his son. She's going to leave after taking it. Damari froze. For the past 3 years, he'd been saving every dime, working 2 jobs, dreaming of saving enough so he and Imani could start a new life, maybe even move to another city. That money was their ticket to a better future. You're delusional, he finally said. You're drunk and you're talking nonsense. Son, I swear. At that moment, Imani came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her hair wet. Is everything all right? She asked, shifting her gaze from her husband to her father-in-law. Yes, Daddy is just leaving, Damari replied in a strained voice. No, Camdemus said stubbornly, getting up. I'm not leaving until you hear me out. I think I'd better leave you too, Imani muttered, heading for the bedroom. Camdemus gave her a suspicious look, then leaned toward his son. Check your money, he whispered. Now. Something in his father's voice made Damari hesitate. He glanced toward the bedroom where Imani had hidden, then headed that way. Camdemus followed him despite his protests. In the bedroom, Imani had already put on her nightgown and was sitting on the edge of the bed. On her lap lay a gym bag, the same one where Damari kept his savings. What are you doing? He asked, feeling his heart plummeting somewhere downward. Imani raised her eyes to him, and there was no fear or guilt in them, only determination. I deserve this, Damari, she said calmly. After all I've been through, you... He couldn't find the words. We'd just gotten married. Today. Exactly. She stood up, clutching her bag. Marriage makes everything legal. Half of yours is mine. I'm just taking my share. Bitch! Shouted Camdemus from behind his son. I knew it. Shut up, old man, Imani snapped at him. You've always been against us. Maybe if you had raised your son better, he wouldn't have been so naive. Damari felt something inside him break. 3 years of work, 3 years of hopes and plans. And all that time she had lied, pretended, waited for the moment to steal his future. Give me the bag, he said quietly. No. Imani took a step back. I'm leaving, Damari. Kiana is waiting for me on the road. Give me the bag, he shouted, rushing towards her. Imani bounced away but tripped over the edge of the bed. The bag fell out of her hands and wads of money scattered on the floor. Damari grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her. How could you? He shouted, not recognizing his own voice. How could you do this to me? Let me go. Imani tried to break free, her nails leaving scratches on his hands. Damari, don't. Camden tried to pull his son away, but he was stronger. At some point, Damari felt something hard under his hand, a table lamp. He couldn't remember himself from the rage and pain of betrayal. He grabbed it and hit Imani on the head. There was a muffled sound and she collapsed on the bed. Blood flowed from the wound on her temple, staining the white linen scarlet. What have you done? Whispered Camdemus, retreating to the wall. Damari stood, breathing heavily with the lamp in his hand. The reality of what was happening was slowly coming to him. He dropped the lamp and leaned toward Imani, trying to feel for a pulse, but there wasn't one. Oh God, he recoiled. Oh God, what have I done? Camdemus ran out of the room, vomiting. Damari stared at the body of his wife, the woman he loved, who had betrayed him, who had killed him, and couldn't move. The sound of police sirens snapped him out of his stupor. Camdemus must have called the police. Damari slowly sank to the floor beside the bed, among the scattered money, and covered his face with his hands. A patrol officer was the first to arrive on the scene who, after assessing the situation, immediately called a detective. An hour later, Detective Jalen Morrow, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a notebook in her hand, showed up at the cabin. She looked around the crime scene, the body on the bed, the money on the floor, the bloody lamp, the sobbing man by the bed, and the shaking elderly man in the corner of the room. "What happened here?" she asked, though the picture was clear enough. Neither Damari nor Camden answered. Detective Morrow sighed and gestured to the forensics team waiting outside. Another marriage that ended in tragedy, another crime of passion, another case for her already thick file. "Mr. Chikwendu," she said, turning to Damari. "You have the right to remain silent." Detective Jalen Morrow methodically surveyed the crime scene, making notes in her tattered notebook. The small house that was supposed to be the beginning of a happy family life had become a scene of tragedy. Forensics worked in the bedroom, photographing the young woman's body on the bloody bed and gathering evidence. Jaylene had been with the Greensboro Police Department for 15 years, the last 8 of them in homicide. She'd seen a lot of crimes of passion, but something always tingled inside when a young woman was the victim, especially on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. "Time of death? She asked the medical examiner, an older man leaning over the body. "Tentatively between 9 and 10 p.m., he replied, checking the body temperature. "Blunt force trauma to the head, probably with this lamp." He nodded at the evidence, already wrapped in a plastic bag. Jalen nodded and shifted her gaze to the money scattered on the floor. They'd been collected and counted, just over $15,000 in cash, wrapped in bank wrappers. "Interesting," she muttered. "Newlyweds rarely carry that much cash." She walked out into the living room where Chikwendu's father and son sat in different corners. Damari, still in his wedding suit, now stained with blood, stared blankly into the void. His hands were cuffed, and scratches were visible on his knuckles. Camdemus, an older man with the swollen face of an alcoholic, fidgeted nervously in his chair, obviously still drunk, though the shock had sobered him a little. "Mr. Chikwendu," Jalen addressed the older man. "I'm Detective Morrow. I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight." Camdemus looked up at her with a troubled expression. "It's all my fault," he muttered. "I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have told him." "What exactly did you tell your son?" Camdemus rubbed his face with shaking hands. "I saw her talking to a friend at the wedding. Something about money, about her taking it and leaving. I tried to warn Damari." "And what happened when you told him about it?" "He went to check." Camdemus hesitated, as if trying to remember. "He found her with the bag. They started fighting. I tried to stop him, but he was out of control. At that moment, Damari raised his head. "He's lying," he said in a hollow voice. He was drunk. He had always hated Imani. He was the one who attacked her. Jalen shifted her gaze to the younger man. "Are you saying that your father killed your wife?" "Yes," Damari straightened up. "He came in drunk, started talking nonsense about Imani wanting to steal my money. Then he followed her into the bedroom. I heard a scream, and when I came running, she was already lying there bleeding, and he was standing over her with a lamp." Camdemus jumped up from his chair, swaying. "You're lying!" he shouted. "You killed her! I saw it with my own eyes!" "Calm down, Mr. Chikwendu." Jaylene gestured for the officer to restrain the older man. "Sit down." She turned to Damari. "If your father killed your wife, why is her blood on your clothes? And where did those scratches on your hands come from?" "I was trying to help her," Damari answered without blinking an eye. "I was trying to stop the bleeding." Jalen nodded, making a note in her notebook. "There's too much inconsistency in the testimony, one accusing the other, but the physical evidence will probably tell the truth." "I want you both to give a formal statement at the station," she said. "Officer Rains will take you. I'm going to stay here a little longer." As the suspects were led away, Jaylene returned to the bedroom for a closer look. The forensics team was already finishing their work, preparing Imani's body for transportation to the morgue. Jaylene put on her gloves and began to look around the room, paying attention to details. On the dressing table was Imani's phone, a cheap smartphone with a cracked screen. She turned it on. The phone wasn't locked. Strange for a young woman not to protect her phone with a password. Scrolling through the messages, Jalen noticed that the correspondence with her contact Kiana had been almost completely deleted. Only a few innocent messages about wedding preparations remained. Too clean, as if someone had purposely erased anything that might have raised suspicion. In Imani's purse, Jalen found a bus ticket to Charlotte for tomorrow morning. 1 seat. It confirmed Camden's theory that the girl was planning to run away. "Detective," one of the CSEs called out to her, "take a look at this." He pointed to the back of the bedside table. There, wedged in the narrow space between the nightstand and the wall, was a thin wad of money, about $1,000. "Looks like not all the money was in the bag," Jaylene remarked. "Interesting." She continued her inspection and found signs of a struggle, an overturned chair, things strewn about, the contents of Imani's makeup bag on the floor. There were bloody finger marks on the bedroom door. Someone had grabbed the jamb, trying to stay on their feet or struggling. 2 hours later, having finished her inspection, Jaylene headed for the police station. Damari and Camden were being held in separate interrogation rooms. She decided to start with her father. By then, Camden had been cleaned up, given coffee, washed, sobered up, but his hands were still trembling and his eyes were haggard. "Mr. Chikwendu," began Jaylene, sitting down opposite him. "I want you to tell me again, in detail, what happened tonight." "I have already told you," he rubbed his temples. "I heard Imani at the wedding talking to a friend about Damari's money. I went to warn my son. When I arrived, they were already at the lodge. I told Damari about my suspicions. He went to check and found Imani with a bag of money. They started fighting. He hit her with a lamp. I saw everything." "But your son says otherwise," said Jaylene. "That it was you who attacked his wife. He's lying." Camdamus slammed his fist on the table. "I would never. She wasn't the best woman, but I would never. And what was your relationship with your sister-in-law?" Camden looked away. "Not very good. I thought she was using my son. He worked hard, saved his money, and she..." He shook his head. "I just felt there was something wrong with her." "You said you tried to stop your son. How did you do that?" "Yeah." Camdemus frowned, as if trying to remember. "I yelled at him. I tried to pull him away, but he was stronger, and I'd had too much to drink." Jaylene made a note in her notebook. The testimony was contradictory, but it slipped in details that would have been hard to make up. However, alcohol intoxication could have distorted Camden's memories. After questioning Camden, who was then sent to a holding cell until all the circumstances were clarified, Jaylene questioned Damari. He was adamant that it was his father who had drunkenly attacked Imani, and that he had tried to protect her. The next morning, Jaylene went to Kiana Nyong's address, a small apartment in a high-rise on the east side of Greensboro. It wasn't a prosperous neighborhood, but it wasn't the worst. Kiana opened the door after the third ring. The young woman looked as if she'd been up all night, tear-stained eyes, disheveled hair, wrinkled clothes. "Ms. Nyong? I'm Detective Morrow with the Greensboro Police Department. May I come in? I need to ask you some questions about Imani Okafor." Kiana stepped back silently, allowing Jaylene into the apartment. Inside, it was modest but clean. There were pictures hanging on the walls, many of Kiana and Imani together, smiling, embracing each other. "Do you know what happened?" Jaylene asked, sitting down in the offered chair. "Yes," Kiana answered quietly. "An officer came by in the night, reported it. I'm sorry. I realize you two were close." Kiana nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "We were like sisters, together since we were 16, through all the hardships. I need your help, Kiana, to understand what happened, to find justice for Imani." "What do you want to know?" Kiana asked, wiping away her tears. "Was Imani going to leave after the wedding?" Kiana shuddered and looked away. "I don't know what you mean. She had a bus ticket to Charlotte for this morning." "One ticket." Jaylene watched Kiana's reaction carefully. "And a large sum of money was found in the cabin." Kiana remained silent, clasping her hands in her lap. "If you know something, you'd better tell me now," Jaylene continued softly. "Otherwise you might become an accomplice." "I didn't do anything," Kiana exclaimed. "But you knew that Imani was planning to rob her husband and escape." Kiana lowered her head and was silent for a long time. "You don't understand," she finally said. "Imani wasn't a bad person. She just needed a way out." "A way out of what?" "Out of this life." Kiana looked up at the detective. "Have you seen where we live? What's happening to us?" Imani had been working as a waitress since she was 16, and that was all that lay ahead of her. 20, 30, 40 more years of trays of food, tips, the dirty hands of managers. And Damari was her way out? It seemed that way at first. Kiana sighed. He was nice, caring, said they'd have a better life. But then, what happened? Imani found out about his past, about his time in prison. He didn't tell her about it. She found the documents by accident, and she became afraid that he'd go back to a life of crime or that his past would catch up with them. And then there's his alcoholic father, always causing trouble. So she decided to run away with his money. Kiana nodded, lowering her head. "I told you it was a bad idea, that we could just get a divorce and start over. But Imani, she thought she deserved that money. For all the pain, for all the promises. What do you know about Imani's past? Before you met her?" Kiana tensed up. "Why do you ask?" "Just trying to get a complete picture." Kiana was silent for a long time, as if deciding whether to speak. "Imani wasn't always Imani Okafor," she finally said quietly. Her real name was Taisha Biwo. She changed it when she ran away from her stepfather when she was 16. Why did she run away? Kiana swallowed. He'd abused her, in every way, and her mother didn't believe it, or pretended not to. "And she never went to the police? In our neighborhood?" Kiana grinned bitterly. "Who cares about another black girl with problems at home?" Jalen nodded. Unfortunately, she knew all too well what Kiana was talking about. Had Imani been in trouble with the law? Petty thefts as a teenager? Nothing serious. Then she got straightened out, worked honestly. Until this, the plan. "And you knew about the plan from the beginning?" "No," Kiana shook her head. "She didn't tell me until a week before the wedding. I tried to talk her out of it. I told her it was dangerous, that Damari could be dangerous if he found out. But she was sure it would work out." Tears ran down Kiana's face again. "And now she's dead. Just as I feared." Jalen handed her a napkin. "Who do you think killed Imani? Damari or his father?" "Damari," Kiana answered without hesitation. "His father is a miserable drunk, but not a murderer. And Damari, he always had this hidden rage in him. Imani said she was afraid of his gaze sometimes, but she thought she could control him long enough to carry out her plan." Back at the station, Jalen dived into the case file. The medical examiner confirmed that death was caused by blunt force trauma to the head, a desk lamp found at the scene. Damari's fingerprints were on the lamp, as well as traces of Imani's blood. Damari's background check confirmed what his father said. Burglary conviction, 2 years in state prison. After his release, good behavior, working at a car wash, moonlighting as a longshoreman. No trouble with the law in the last 3 years. Name check on Taisha Biwo also yielded results. Several priors for petty theft as a teenager, then disappeared from police view. The name change to Imani Okafor was formalized 5 years ago. Conflicting testimony from father and son complicated the case. Kamdem insisted he saw the son kill his wife. Damari blamed the father, but the physical evidence pointed to Damari, his fingerprints on the murder weapon, his blood on his clothes, the scratches on his hands from Imani's fingernails. By late afternoon, Jalen questioned Damari again, this time with new information. "Did you know that your wife used to be Taisha Biwo?" she asked bluntly. Damari flinched and looked away. "Yes. he finally answered. She told me a few months after we met about running away from her abusive stepfather, changing her name, starting a new life. And you didn't tell her about your criminal past? No, he shook his head. I was afraid she'd leave, that she'd think I was like the men who'd hurt her before. But she did find out. Yeah, about 6 months ago. She found the prison records I kept. There was a big scandal. But then she seemed to forgive me, said she understood that people make mistakes, that all that mattered was who I was now. What have you become? Jalen asked, watching him closely. A man who wanted to give her a better life, Damari answered, tears glistening in his eyes. I worked like hell for 3 years. I saved every dime. I dreamed we'd buy a small house, maybe have kids, make a fresh start. And where did you get $15,000 in cash? Damari stopped talking with his head down. It's not exactly honest money, he finally admitted. I'm not back to stealing, if that's what you mean. But sometimes, help people I knew resell things. Didn't ask where it came from. Fixing cars without a license. Worked on construction sites without papers. Did Imani know about this? No, he shook his head. I told her I was just working hard. She didn't ask too many questions. The morning of the 3rd day of the investigation greeted Detective Jalen Morrow with gray clouds and drizzling rain. She sat at her desk in the department, poring over the paperwork on the Imani Okafor case. Something didn't add up about Damari's testimony. Too smooth, too thoughtful for someone who had just experienced tragedy. Jalen reread his statement. Damari claimed that his father, drunk and violent, had stormed into the bedroom and hit Imani with a lamp when she tried to calm him down. But the forensic report told a different story. The blow was delivered from top to bottom, with force unlikely to have been applied by an elderly, inebriated Camdem. And then, how do you explain the signs of a struggle, the scratches on Damari's hands? The phone on the desk rang, interrupting her musings. Detective Morrow, she answered. This is Kiana Nyong. The voice on the other end sounded uncertain. Imani's friend. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you again. There are things I didn't tell you yesterday. Jaylene straightened up in her chair. I'm listening to you, Ms. Nyong. Not on the phone, Kiana said. Can I come to the station? Or can you come to my place? It's important. An hour later, Kiana was sitting across from Jaylene in the interview room at the Greensboro police station. She looked even more exhausted than yesterday, but there was determination in her eyes. I didn't tell you the whole truth, she began without preamble. I was afraid of being accused of complicity, but I can't do this anymore. For Imani's sake. What exactly is it that you didn't tell me, Kiana? Kiana took a deep breath. Imani wasn't just going to leave. She had planned it from the beginning. The wedding was part of the plan. A plan? Yes. She met Damari when he was first out of prison. He often came to the diner, tipped well, even though he was obviously not rich. Imani suspected he had some money hidden from the authorities and decided, Kiana stammered, I thought he should pay. Pay for what? For what she'd been through because of men like that. The pain, the humiliation, the years of poverty. Kiana looked up at Jaylene. You have to understand, Imani was a good person, but life broke her. She believed she deserved this chance at a new life, even if she had to take it by force. So she originally planned to steal Damari's money? Yes. Imani found out that he was saving money by working multiple jobs. Perhaps some of that money wasn't exactly legitimate, but it didn't matter. The plan was simple. Make him fall in love, marry him, access the money, and disappear. Jalen watched Kiana carefully. When exactly was she going to do this? The same night after the wedding. She knew the money would be with him. He didn't trust banks after prison. She had a ticket on the first morning bus to Charlotte, and from there a plane to Miami. And you were supposed to meet her in Charlotte? Yes, Kiana nodded. I was supposed to take the bus the day after her, to start a new life together, away from Greensboro, away from poverty, away from it all. What went wrong? Kiana lowered her gaze, clenching her hands. His father. He overheard our conversation at the wedding. I told Imani it was too dangerous, that Damari could be unpredictable if he learned the truth. Apparently, Camdemus heard enough to get the point and went to warn his son. Jalen leaned back in her chair, comprehending the new information. It completely changed the picture of what was going on. Not a spontaneous murder in a drunken rage, but a reaction to betrayal. Thank you for your candor, Kiana. It will help us establish the truth. Kiana nodded, wiping away her tears. I know what Imani did was wrong, but she didn't deserve to die for it. No one deserves to. After talking to Kiana, Jalen headed to the holding cell where Camden was being held. He looked better than he had the night of the murder, eyes clearer, hands barely shaking. The enforced sobriety seemed to have done him good. Mr. Chikwendu, began Jaylene. I would like to talk to you again about the night of the murder. Now that you are completely sober, perhaps your memories will become clearer. Camdemus nodded, hunched over on the cell bench. I remember everything better now, though sometimes I wish I could forget. Tell me again what happened after you arrived at the cabin. Camdemus took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. Yeah, I overheard Imani and her friend talking at the wedding. They were talking about Damari's money and how she would take it and leave that very night. I knew my son had been saving that money for 3 years, working like hell. I couldn't let her steal his future. Is that why you went to the cabin? Yes, I was drunk, that's true, but not so drunk that I didn't realize what was going on. When I arrived, they were in the living room drinking champagne. I asked to speak to Damari alone and told him what I'd heard. How did he react? He didn't believe me at first. Said I was making it up because I was always against their marriage. But then Imani went to the bedroom and he followed her. I went after them, wanted to make sure he didn't do anything stupid. Camdemus fell silent, remembering the events of that night. When we entered the bedroom, Imani was sitting on the bed with his gym bag. There was money in the bag. She didn't even deny it. Said she deserved it, that it was her share. Camdemus shook his head. Damari had gone off the rails. I've never seen him so furious. He lunged at her, grabbed her by the shoulders. I tried to pull him away, but he pushed me away. And then he grabbed the lamp and hit her. Just one blow, but so hard. Camdem's eyes filled with tears. I should have stopped him. I should have intervened sooner. If I hadn't been drunk, if I'd been able to hold him back. It wasn't your fault, Mr. Chikwendu, Jaylene said softly. You tried to prevent the tragedy, but you couldn't. And now the girl is dead and my son will be a murderer. Camdemus looked up at her. I know he denies it. He says I killed her? Yes, Jalen nodded. That's his version. He's always done it, even when he was a kid. When something happened, he always blamed others. Never could admit his mistakes. Camdemus shook his head. His mother spoiled him, and when she died, I didn't do a good job of raising him. Maybe that's why he became like that. Are you prepared to testify under oath? Yes, Camdemus answered firmly. I'll tell the truth, even if it destroys our family. Imani deserves justice, despite what she has planned. Back at the office, Jaylene received the forensics report. They found Damari's fingerprints on the shards of the broken lamp, as well as fibers from his clothes under Imani's fingernails. This confirmed that there had been a struggle between them before they died. But the most important find awaited her on the table, a bag of evidence. Inside lay Damari's wedding ring, a gold ring with the date of the wedding engraved inside. The ring had been found under Imani's body, and it had traces of her blood on it. Jalen examined the ring carefully. Damari had obviously removed it before striking his wife, perhaps unknowingly, in a moment of rage, and had forgotten or failed to notice in the chaos of subsequent events. That was the final piece of the puzzle. Jalen gathered up all the materials and headed for the interrogation room, where Damari was waiting. He sat leaning back in his chair, seemingly calm, but with tension in his eyes. "How's the investigation going, Detective?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Did you realize my father was lying?" Jalen put the case file in front of him, but didn't open it. Mr. Chikwendu, I spoke to Kiana Nyong today. Damari tensed but said nothing. She told me an interesting story about how Imani had been planning to run away with your money since the beginning of your relationship, how the wedding was part of the plan, how they were going to start a new life in Miami with your $15,000. Damari gritted his teeth but continued to remain silent. Your father also gave new testimony, already sobered up. Very detailed testimony about how you found Imani with the money, how you jumped her, how you hit her with a lamp. He's lying, Damari said quietly. He has always lied. Is this a lie too? Jalen opened the folder and placed a picture of a bloody ring in front of him. Your wedding ring, found under Imani's body, with her blood on it. Damari stared at the photograph, his face pale. We know what happened, Damari, Jalen said softly. Your father overheard Imani discussing an escape plan with Kiana. He came to warn you. You checked and found it was true. Imani was going to run away with the money you'd been saving for 3 years. You got angry. You lost control. It wasn't a premeditated murder. It was an outburst of rage, a reaction to betrayal. Damari covered his face with his hands, his shoulders beginning to shake. I loved her, he whispered. I really did. Everything I did was for her, for us. I imagined us buying a little house, having kids, starting over. And she just used me. Tell me what happened that night, Damari, Jalen asked quietly. The truth. Damari dropped his hands, his eyes full of tears. When my father told me what he heard, I didn't want to believe it. But then I went to check and saw Imani with my bag. She didn't even deny it. Said she deserved the money, that it was her share, that marriage made everything legal. He shook his head. I just snapped. 3 years of work, 3 years of hopes and plans. And all that time, she lied, pretended, used me. What happened next? I lunged at her, tried to take the bag. We fought. My father tried to intervene, but I pushed him away. Imani was screaming, scratching, and then I saw the lamp. I don't even remember grabbing it. It was one blow. Just one. Damari swallowed. And then she fell on the bed, and the blood. So much blood. He fell silent, shuddering at the memory. And then? I don't know. I was petrified. I couldn't move. My father ran out of the room vomiting. Then I heard him calling the police. And I just, sat there. I couldn't believe it had happened. That I killed her. Damari looked up at Jalen. I didn't mean it. I swear I didn't mean to kill her. But you did, Jalen said quietly. And then you lied and blamed your father. I was scared, Damari whispered. I had just gotten out of prison 3 years ago. I didn't want to go back, didn't want to lose everything again. He shook his head. But it's over now, isn't it? I'll still go back there. Yes. Jalen nodded, but truthful testimony and remorse will be taken into account by the court. At that moment, the door of the interrogation room opened, and Camdemus was led into the room. The old man looked haggard, but he held himself upright. My father wanted to see you, explained Jaleen Damari. I thought you both deserved to talk. Camdemus walked slowly to the table and sat down across from his son. They looked at each other in silence for a long time. Why have you come? Damari finally asked. To see me fall? No, son, Camdem answered quietly. I came to tell you that I am sorry for many things. Regrets? Damari grinned bitterly. For turning me into the police? No, for not being able to stop you, for not being a better father, for not teaching you how to deal with anger, with pain, with betrayal. Camdem reached across the table and placed his hand on his son's arm. I know what you've been through. I know how hard it was for you. But violence never solves problems. It only creates new ones. Damari looked at his father's hand resting on his own, tears streaming down his cheeks. I always thought you hated me, he whispered. That you were disappointed with me. I loved you, son. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it. After your mother died, I lost it. Started drinking. I couldn't cope. And you paid for my mistakes." Camdemus squeezed his son's hand. "But it's not too late to do the right thing now, to tell the truth, to take responsibility for your actions." Damari nodded, wiping away his tears. "I have already confessed, Father. I told the truth." He looked up at Jalen. "I want to make a formal statement, to tell everything as it happened." Jalen nodded. "I'll write down your confession and it will be attached to the case file." She watched the father and son sit holding hands, their faces contorted with pain and remorse. Two broken men, two broken lives, and a third cut short in the prime of life. After Damari formally confessed to the murder and was transferred to the county jail to await trial, Jalen finished her case report. She sat at her desk looking at a photograph of Imani Okafor, a young woman so desperate to escape the cycle of poverty that she was willing to cheat, steal, and betray. And Damari Chikwendu, the man who loved her, but in a moment of rage, became a murderer. A circle of deceit and mistrust, closed by tragedy. Jaylene had seen too many such cases in her career. People cornered by circumstance take desperate steps. They believe the end justifies the means, don't see any other way. She closed the case file and put it in the stack of completed investigations. Another tragedy in a long list. Another story of how mistrust and deception ruin lives, and how in an attempt to escape the past, people often create an even worse future. Jaylene got up, put on her jacket, and walked out of the station. The drizzling rain was still falling, turning the streets of Greensboro into a gray, blurry expanse. Somewhere in the city, Kiana Nyong was mourning a friend and unfulfilled dreams. Camdem Chikwendu was returning to an empty house, to his demons and the bottle. And Damari sat in his cell, realizing that with one blow he had destroyed not only his wife's life, but his own as well. Justice had been served, but no one was better off for it.